Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over the upcoming pattern over the next 10 days. We're going to have some chillier temperatures, especially for the northern plains and the northeast, and then in the middle of the country it'll probably get a little bit warmer. And also the southern tier of the United States, that looks to be the area that'll especially stay in that milder and drier pattern. So we're going to be going over this for, again, the next 10 days. It's going to be very interesting to track because this will be one of the first blasts of cold air. A lot of areas will see their first frost on these next few days. So again, it's going to be interesting. We're going to be looking at the low temperatures as well as some of the upper air conditions that are allowing this to happen. So let's start off with your current National Weather Service page. As you can see, we have a few winter weather advisories in effect for some parts of California, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and South Dakota. We have some winter storm warnings up for central Wyoming, and then we have some red flag warnings up in parts of Colorado and Kansas. Other than that, we don't have many other watches or warnings. Yesterday, we had a high temperature of 94 degrees in Rio Grande Village, Texas. The low temperature was in Bodie, California, where they got down to 14 degrees. Highest rainfall report was in Orwell, New York, where they got 2.26 inches of rain. And there were no snowfall, or actually there was snowfall report yesterday, 2 miles northwest of Myers, California, where they got 3.5 inches of snow. So that wraps it up for the watches and warnings. Let's move on to the actual low temperatures. And you're going to see that this colder air mass, which by this point is sitting in the west, is going to continue to drive further to the east. You're going to have a little pocket in the middle where it will be a little bit warmer, but it will eventually get over. This cold air mass will override that, and we'll eventually see some of that cold air spill in. So this is for tomorrow. Again, you can see that cold trough into the western half of the country. The east, by this point, not really too warm, but you are definitely warming up. It is a little bit milder than normal. So nothing that's going to be super warm, but definitely it will be a nice break from the colder temperatures that we've had over the past few days. If we move this on to Thursday, which is October 21st, you can see that we do have some colder conditions getting down into the 20s in parts of Minnesota, the Dakotas, even into parts of the Rockies as well. By this point, we have the general flow of this trough still in the west, but it is moving ever so slightly further to the east. This is all being centered around one little low pressure system, which is by this point right here. To the east of there, just to the east, we'll have some warmer temperatures, and then again, further west of that, we'll actually have the colder temperatures. Once this low pressure moves by your area, that's when you'll start to see all the cold air start coming and pouring down. If we move this on to Friday of this week, you can see that we have 30s and 20s for much of the northern plains, the eastern coast, the eastern third of the United States, the southern plains, the southeast, all dealing with some rather warm and mild temperatures. So to end off the week, it'll actually be fairly nice and mild, but as we head back into the weekend, it is going to start to cool down. So if you live along the East Coast and or also for parts of the Southeast and the Southern Plains, it looks like you'll actually be fine for Saturday. It's once you get inland into the interior Northeast, the Ohio Valley, and also for the Northern Plains, where it'll start to get a little bit chilly as we get into Saturday, which is October 23rd. You're looking at low temperatures for most spots, getting down into the low 30s. It would be in the mid 30s if you live in an area like Indiana, Ohio, southern Michigan, western Pennsylvania, upstate New York. So those areas that are a little bit further to the south would be getting into the mid 30s, but overall, we're dealing with a fairly chilly pattern for much of the eastern part of the country. If we move this on to Sunday, this is when much of the east is dealing with those colder temperatures all the way to the coast. So we have mid to low 30s over a good portion of the northeast, the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, all dealing with some rather chilly temperatures. the southern plains are still dealing with mild temperatures. Your low temperatures are going to be up near 70s. So you can imagine that the high temperatures would actually be in the 80s or 90s. So it's going to be rather warm for those spots. If we move this on to Monday, which is October 25th, it's going to stay chilly for the east. But every single day, it's starting to move a little bit further to the east. Now, if you were to look at the upper air map by this point, we actually have the trough mostly just along the eastern section of this little cold air mass. So not this entire area is actually covered underneath that trough, but what we're seeing is that we have strong northwesterly winds coming in from Canada. So when you have that, you're bringing in cold air from central and northern Canada, and that ends up filtering into the Great Lakes and the Northeast, and that'll bring in, again, those much colder temperatures. So even though you might not be under the scope of that trough, which by this point is actually relatively small, you will still have some colder temperatures in areas like Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. So it will still be fairly chilly in those areas, even though, again, if you were to look at an upper air map, you would actually not expect that just by simply looking at that for maybe a couple minutes. If we were to look at for Tuesday of next week, this is October 26th, it's going to be still fairly cold if you live especially in the Northeast, maybe also for a little bit of Ohio and Michigan. We'll have to see how fast this cold air can move out, because there is a chance that by Tuesday these areas are actually warming up, but if you live in the Northeast, let's say from Pennsylvania on eastward, it does look like you have a fairly good chance for Tuesday to be rather cold. This might be some of the coldest air of the season that you've seen so far, especially if you live in parts of the coastal Northeast, where those areas have not gotten too cold just yet. If we move this on to Wednesday of that week, you can see that we have our next system coming. So we have your trough into the west, you have your low pressure up into the Midwest, and then we have all that warm air out ahead of this. So we have the cold air out in the west, we have the warm air in the east, and then in the Northeast, we have more cold air. It's a very up and down pattern. You're going to have warm air being matched with cold air every couple of days. So this is going to be a back and forth pattern. You're not really going to have anything that's going to stay for more than 5 days at a time. And then if we move this on to Thursday, you can still see that we have a little bit of chillier air lingering in just behind the system. So for areas like the Great Lakes, you'll maybe have your low temperatures into the low 40s, but nothing really that cold. The Northeast still lingering on to some colder temperatures, but overall, it looks like a lot of areas start to warm up a little bit as we start to get into the last few days of October. So let's look at the upper air map, because this will give you a good idea of what's happening. We have this little low pressure system, which is going to be the main driver of this pattern. This is actually bringing a little bit of snow up into Wyoming and South Dakota for today. We covered that more in yesterday's video, so if you want to check that out, you can just go to the most recent upload before this one, and it should be there on my channel. And we go, especially at the second half of that video, we talk more about that snowstorm. So this little system right here in the Midwest is going to be moving further to the east. As it does so, it's going to be bringing along a trough right behind it, and then we'll have a little bit of warmer air right in front of it, and then we'll have a somewhat of a moderated trough, nothing really too crazy, right ahead of it as well. So here's how this is going to play out. We have this system, which still is over here by this point, but we have a stronger one, which has developed up into Ontario and Quebec. So we have some source of cold air by this point. By the way, here's your next trough, which is going to be moving in for later next week. So we have that colder air into the eastern part of Canada, and now that's going to start to link into the Northeast and the Great Lakes. So this would be by Sunday, which is the 24th of this week, and you can see that we have some of those northwesterly winds, and some in some areas just straight westerly winds. And they're originating from James Bay in Canada. So here's the origin of your air, and now you can see the wind flow, which is somewhat like this. So in a curved shape like that is where we're getting most of our colder air from. So we do have a trough which is into the northeast, but this entire part of the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, northeast will all be under the cold air because of the wind flow. You don't necessarily need to be directly under the trough to still have some colder conditions. We also still see that massive trough out in the western United States. Again, this is going to be moving to the east, but we're not going to talk about that too much in today's video because it's a little bit too far out for us to really get an accurate view of what may happen. Now, if we move this on to Tuesday, you would look at this map and you would say, wow, this is going to be a really warm day for many areas. And it actually will be if you live in the Great Lakes and maybe areas like the Tennessee Valley and the Southeast. But if you live in the Northeast, look at where your winds are generating from. They're coming out of the Northwest again. And if you remember from the temperature map, this was actually one of the coldest days for the Northeast. So you're going to look at this and you're going to think, wow, this is going to be a fairly warm day because you immediately see the red and orange colors and you associate that with the warmer conditions and with high pressure, which in most scenarios would actually be correct. But in this case, because you have that trough bringing in a little bit of a that's almost like a weight on the entire jet stream, so it's causing this to dive down further to the south. So we actually do have, again, that fairly cold air originating up from northern Ontario in Canada, and that's coming straight down into the northeast. So whatever the temperatures were up there in James Bay in Canada, that similar air, those similar temperatures is going to be filtering its way down into the northeast as we get to Tuesday of this week. Now, by Friday, you can see a lot has changed. We no longer have that big high pressure up here. We don't have that anymore. So now we actually have low pressure, which is sitting up over much of Canada. But we do have a decent amount of ridging up through the United States. So what I'm assuming is going to happen, now this is the last cycle on the model run, so this is as far as this model will go, but I'm assuming if you were to play this out, you can see that we have that trough out in the west. I would assume that this would move to the east. We would see this ridge break up, and then we would eventually see potentially a couple dives of cold air from Canada, considering that you already have so much troughing up into that part of Canada. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Again, it's a very quiet day in terms of weather. The only system really to talk about is the one out in the west, and we already made a video about that yesterday, so I don't want to continue to talk about that same system, especially considering that it will be over a fairly localized area. Most of these spots in the west are actually just dealing with rain. So when you get up into the mountains and then also into some of the areas like Wyoming and western South Dakota that are going to be dealing with a little bit of snowfall. So we covered that in yesterday's video. I didn't want to go over the same thing once again. Once we get into November, I'm thinking that we're going to have a lot more storms to talk about. So, again, that is going to wrap it up. If you have any questions or comments, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Goodbye.